Our next presentation is on DV 101. Emily Westphal is the Director of Education and Communications for One Safe Place. She's certified by the California Office of Emergency Services in crisis as a crisis intervention advocate for domestic violence and sexual assault. And this is, as I'm sure she'll cover, the progress in understanding this and intervening in a meaningful way has come a long way over our years. And I'm glad she's here. This is an important subject for us to understand. Taking the right steps early on is essential. So with that, I ask you to welcome Emily Westphal.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? I've been given a mic, so who knows what's going to happen. I could sing, I could dance, we'll figure it out as we go, all right? You let me know if you need me to put on a show up here, I can. So I am here today to share about domestic violence, and as a fellow first responder, I'm here to share about what that's going to look like when you arrive on that scene and how that person might be feeling, and if there are children involved, what that looks like. And so we're really going to have an opportunity to kind of think through, as many of us have likely experienced these circumstances of an individual in a relationship that is unhealthy or unsafe. So the mission of One Safe Place is to provide intervention and safety to a community affected by domestic and sexual abuse. And we serve primarily Shasta County. Our end game, our ultimate goal, is a community free of this type of violence. And so at the same time that we're providing intervention services, that we're helping the people who need our help right now, we're also providing prevention. We're also providing education to our community so that we can work towards ending this type of abuse and violence in homes and in families. This is our management team. But our story, the One Safe Place story, started with this one woman right here. Her name is Gretchen Peterson, and in the 1970s, Gretchen was a resident here in Redding, California. She had raised her family. She had two sons who were grown and had moved away to have families of their own, and Gretchen was a widower. She was also that woman in town that was known for getting stuff done. Right? So she was the person you went to if you really needed a project to happen, right? And she was a person who really exemplified community. Now, Gretchen had seen across the nation in the early 70s a movement similar to other civil rights movements, the battered women's movement. And really this was a movement to help women and children who were in abusive home environments to seek help and safety. And so Gretchen, seeing that there wasn't anything like that here in Redding, took it upon herself to provide that service. She bought herself a yellow checkered taxi cab and a shotgun, and she posted her personal phone number all over Redding. And she told people to call her anytime, day or night, and she would drive that yellow taxi cab with the shotgun sitting in the front seat just in case, and she would pick them up from that unsafe situation and get them home to her own home, find them food, shelter, employment, whatever they needed, and then send them out on their way. Now, this is Gretchen at that time, in the 70s, at 70 years old herself. So you can picture that in your head. I think that's kind of a fun story. You can imagine this woman showing up. And I doubt that anyone really messed with her, because I think that she probably could handle her own, right? And of course, she had that shotgun just in case, but rumor had, I don't think she ever had to actually use it, okay? The idea of our services and the model that we use today came from Gretchen. So a number of years after her working and kind of doing this on her own, the American Association of University Women here in Redding came to Gretchen. They said, we love what you're doing, but we want to create a sustainable way to do this work. And so they created what was known for many, many years as the Shasta Women's Refuge. And some of you may be familiar with that organization. We operated as the Shasta Women's Refuge for over 30 years, and we operated with this model right here. So the idea was that a person would come into our office, they would meet with an advocate, it would probably take them a few hours to kind of sit and tell their story, and maybe they had kids in tow, and they'd just come out of trauma, and so they were experiencing a lot of emotion and a lot of challenges. And at the time, we would sort of give them this laundry list of the things they would need to do in order to get the help. So if you need legal assistance, here are the offices you need to go to. If you need medical care, here are the places you need to go to. And then we would sort of send them out the door and hope it worked. And what we saw was about 85% of the time, an individual would get overwhelmed and they would go back to their unhealthy or unsafe relationship. Right? So we had an 85% attrition rate. And when we threw into Google Maps all of the services that are available currently under our one roof, we saw that it took a person over an hour and 45 minutes to drive through Redding to get to all of those places. By bike, over 4 hours, walking over 14 hours. And when we tried to put it in to figure out our bus routes, it's not physically possible. It doesn't go to all of these places, especially not in one day. And it was this process we could tell, like, of course people are getting overwhelmed. Of course they feel like they can't get the help they need in the same place, right? So around 2000, down in San Diego County, a man named Casey Gwynn had an idea of a way to do this work a little bit better. And so he was working as a DA, and he was working in elder abuse and also domestic violence crimes. And as space opened up in the DA's office building that they inhabited, he would offer up those leases to his social service partners. So he would offer it up to CalWorks and the local women's shelter and other services that catered to a similar audience. And what he discovered was that when we co-located all of these similar services under one roof, it made it that much easier for a person to follow through and get the help they needed, right? So when we co-located this process, it made it more difficult for someone to say, I can't, I won't, I shouldn't, right? In 2009, the DA's office here in Shasta County applied for a grant to help get a similar model here in Shasta County, and we received one of those 5 grants in California. So in 2010, the Shasta Family Justice Center came to town, and some of you may be familiar with that organization as well. And what we realized really quickly was that the Shasta Women's Refuge and the Shasta Family Justice Center were doing really similar work. We were working with the same audiences, and we were duplicating a lot of our services. So in an effort to help to engage our community that much more, in 2012, these 2 organizations, one with a 35-plus year history and a great reputation, and another with a new way of doing this work, a better way of doing this work, merged together. And we became the Shasta Women's Refuge and Family Justice Center, which was the longest name ever, right? So we would have to answer the phone like that multiple times a day, and people were really still pretty confused about who we were and what we offered, because there were a few parts of our name that were misleading, right? We had that word women. And we have always, since the time of Gretchen, served men, women, and children who are victims of abusive circumstances. But that wasn't what was understood within our community. We also had the word justice, which often equates to law enforcement. And so individuals coming in for help felt that they had to report to law enforcement in order to get advocacy assistance, which is not the case. Okay? So in an effort to kind of get rid of all of that confusion and also to create a name that was a little bit easier to say, a little bit easier to remember and understand, in 2013, we changed our name officially to One Safe Place. And so we've operated as that for the last few years. And as One Safe Place, our current client service center is located in downtown Redding in the Market Street Promenade. So we're the entire 3rd floor of what used to be the old downtown mall. And we provide a number of services as our One Safe Place advocacy staff. So victim advocacy, we have a hotline that's 24/7, 365 days a year. We have legal assistance and court accompaniment and tribal services. We have child and family services and Intermountain outreach to Shingletown and Bernie. We have food and clothing assistance. Additionally, we provide emergency responses to medical providers and law enforcement 24/7. Case management as this person or family is going through the process of healing, emergency financial assistance and household establishment assistance. We also provide parenting and relationship education, community outreach to share this message with our audience in the community, and then prevention education in all of our K through 12 schools. And in addition to all of these services offered by our staff, we're co-located. So under one roof, we have not only One Safe Place and all of those services offered, but we also have victim compensation services offered through the DA's office and Crime Victims Assistance Center. We have health and human service agencies that include CalWorks and mental health for eligibility and service providing. We have counseling services and support groups that are both faith-based through Hope City and also non-denominational through Family Dynamics Resource Center. We have elder abuse care with adult protective services under the same roof. We have legal services through several local attorney teams who offer assistance with restraining orders, assistance with simple divorces, custody agreements, things like that. And then we offer military services for active duty and veterans through the State of California Military Department. And again, all of these services and partners are under one roof. So an individual walks through the door, sits down, and everyone comes to them. And you can imagine how different that would feel than having to, know that you've got all of these appointments to make and all of these, processes to follow, and that you have to travel through town to do that. So the idea here is that we're making it as easy as possible for someone to get help, because it shouldn't be difficult for someone to get help, right? That should be a basic human condition, a basic human right. We're not done yet. We are One Safe Place, but we currently operate out of 3 locations. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So we are in the process of building a facility that should be opened in November of this year that will allow us to serve all individuals and have all of our services under one roof. So the bottom floor will be all of those services I just mentioned, and the top floor will be a shelter that will house men, women, and children, up to 60 individual people in private family rooms, so they have the opportunity to heal and work towards that process of feeling safe and comfortable again. And those services will be available in November of this year, so we're really excited about that. I wanted to take a chance today to talk about some of the dynamics of domestic violence, because as many of us as first responders know, when you walk into a circumstance where domestic violence has just occurred or trauma is present in that home environment, it can be a really challenging experience for us. It can be a really dangerous, potentially, experience for us. And so wanting to talk through what those dynamics look like and help us to better understand. Because when we understand, we can provide better service, right? So the Penal Code identifies domestic violence as abuse committed against an adult or a minor who is a spouse, cohabitant, former cohabitant, or person with whom the suspect has had a child or is having or has had a dating or engagement relationship. It's the Penal Code, so there's a million ands and ases, right? But generally speaking, these are individuals who are in a dating or marriage relationship, past or present. Okay. Nationwide, we know that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. So we're dealing with a significant population here. We also understand that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 7 men will experience sexual assault in their lifetime. Each and every day in the United States, 3 women and 1 man are killed at the hand of their intimate partner, right? At the person who is supposed to love them most. 1 in 6 women and 1 in 19 men have been stalked in their lifetime. And it's estimated that only about 25% of violent incidents like this, domestic violence or sexual abuse, ever get reported to law enforcement or agencies like us. So we're talking about a significant population of people, but also individuals who feel like they don't know where to get the support or they don't know how to get the support they need. Okay. Individuals most at risk are typically women aged 18 to 24 years old. And individuals who have expressed that they would like to leave, so they've shared with their partner that they're planned to leave, or they have just left. So when we're talking about dangerous circumstances, those are the most extreme cases we see. Now, in order to understand domestic violence, we also have to answer this question that gets asked over and over and over again in our community. Why don't these people just leave, right? So when you're in an unsafe circumstance, why can't that victim just walk out the door? And our ability to understand the things that keep us in a relationship, whether it's healthy or not, really helps us to understand how we can better serve, right? Because we're walking into a circumstance that is emotional, that is connected, that has roots that go deeper than the surface we might be experiencing or seeing. So at the root of all of these circumstances is the fact that these are relationships and that there is or has at one point been the presence of love or the perception of love, right? So that's a really powerful thing. That can keep someone stuck in their circumstance no matter what they're experiencing. But we also have a number of other factors that might play into that person not being able or feeling able to walk away. Things like fear of the unknown, fear of that person's threats, or fear that they won't be able to provide for themselves or their children, right? I won't go through each and every one of these, but you can see children can be a factor in someone choosing to stay. If they're trying to keep their family together, they want to, try to provide a two-parent household for their children. But children can also be a huge factor in someone finally making the choice to leave, when we can help to educate about the effects of domestic violence on children. We're talking about, here, gender stereotypes or religious beliefs that might keep a person from feeling like they can obtain a divorce or leave a relationship if they've made that commitment. Immigration status or the threat that person might hold over your head in that way. Childhood trauma or the feeling that maybe you don't know anything different, that this is your normal, right? This is what every relationship looks like, isn't it? Right? Social norms or cultural understandings of how men and women or how relationships should impact your life. Lack of options or lack of support, and then generally within our society, the idea of victim blaming, that we often ask this question: why do victims stay in abusive relationships, instead of the converse of that, which is why do individuals perpetrate violence against the ones they love the most? Right? This is a tool that we use quite often to help individuals understand maybe what they've been experiencing. We call it the power and control wheel. It's quite small for many of you, I'm sure, so I'll go through it so that we can understand a little bit better. The outside ring that you see there is physical abuse. So that is what many of us, I think, can equate domestic violence to very specifically. We understand that it's a physical bruise, scratch, mark of some kind. So it's going to be anything like scratching, using weapons, spitting, punching, slapping, hitting. That's kind of our absolute understanding of domestic violence. But what we know, and the legal system is learning in this process, is that domestic violence comes in many forms, and many of those forms are often under the surface and things that we might not see on that person's skin or on the outside initially. This is going to be things like isolation or intimidation, using economic or financial means to control another person, any sort of sexual abuse, gender bias or stereotypes that help keep a person boxed into their role, threats against that person or against people they love, using children to either send messages back and forth or pit them against the other parent. Emotional abuse is going to be pretty all-encompassing when it comes to anything verbal or anything meant to make that person feel less than, right? Make them feel crazy. So emotional abuse is in extreme. And many of these circumstances that are happening inside the wheel here are situations that, again, aren't going to show up on the surface and are probably going to leave much longer lasting effects than even that physical bruise or scratch, right? Another tool that we use to help individuals understand where they're coming from, where they've been, is the cycle of violence. And the cycle of violence is pretty straightforward. So we start in that honeymoon phase where at the beginning of your relationship, everything is rosy and wonderful, and this person is so loving and so great. And they want to be with you all the time, right? And they want to be with you so much that they're going to make sure that they give you a ride to work every day because they want to know that you get there safe, right? But then they want to pick you up from work every day too, and they want to monitor who you're seeing and who you're hanging out with because, that's really their right. They want to make you safe. And so in that process of safety, maybe you're hanging out with the wrong person or they perceive that you're doing something wrong, and then they might get kind of jealous and tension might start to build in that relationship. And so at that point, then you feel like you're kind of walking on eggshells. You're fighting a lot, you're yelling a lot. Anything you do or say might potentially set that person off. And that set off is our explosion phase, where there's some sort of attack or threat of a physical, sexual, or emotional nature. And afterwards, we go back to that honeymoon, where we say all the right things, and we make all the promises, and we say, we're never going to do it again. maybe if you hadn't done or said that, I wouldn't have had to react that way. So really, it's kind of your fault, right? Maybe I'm going to shower you with gifts and flowers. And then at the same time, I'm going to continue to express that same tension that was present because we never addressed it in this cycle. We never talked it through. We never communicated about it. And what we know of this cycle of violence is that nationwide, it takes the average person about 7 times through a cycle like this before they'll leave their unhealthy relationship. And the 8th time a person returns to a relationship like this, the likelihood that it will end in a domestic violence homicide goes up by 40%. Because that emotional nature of a relationship creates a sort of powder keg, right? That explosion phase is going to get bigger and more extreme and more dangerous as that person tests the limits of what you can handle. And that honeymoon phase is going to get smaller and smaller as that person realizes they don't have to do or say as much to get you back. So we understand that often when that response happens, that you show up at that home environment, it's because this person has been through this a number of times, right? And that at that point, it's become extremely dangerous. Understanding the mindset of crisis is a valuable tool for each and every one of us. It helps us to understand where this person is coming from. So a crisis is, in essence, a stage in a sequence of events at which the trend of all future events, for better or worse, is determined. It's a turning point, okay? It's also a condition of instability or danger, as I mentioned. And it's a dramatic emotional and circumstantial upheaval in a person's life. Now, when we respond to an individual who is experiencing a dramatic, emotional, or circumstantial upheaval in their life, do you think they are ready to receive help? Most often not, right? Most often what we're dealing with are some extreme physical challenges. So a person who's just been through trauma, who's experiencing the aftermath of crisis, is going to be experiencing shock and numbness and a feeling of being frozen. They've just experienced that fight or flight. So they've had this adrenaline pump go through their body, and now they're dealing with the aftermath of that, right? That might include things like hyperventilation or feeling like they're going in slow motion, like they can't really focus or they can't get the story straight, right? It might also include, through that adrenaline rush, things like heart rate increase, right? So we're dealing with a physical response to that trauma. We're also dealing in an emotional response, because these things do not come mutually exclusive. So emotionally, this person is feeling an extreme amount of shock, right? Disbelief or denial might come with that shock. Feelings of terror, especially if you're not sure of where that perpetrator is, if they haven't been apprehended. Confusion about what's just happened and what's going to happen moving forward. Guilt about the fact that maybe they feel they've put this on themselves or on their children or on their family. Relief that someone finally has realized what's going on, because these are individuals who've likely been through something like this that hasn't maybe been as dramatic. And then a feeling of loss of trust, especially when we're dealing with individuals who maybe have gone for help before and haven't gotten the help they feel they've needed, right? So crisis intervention is about understanding the difference between empathy versus sympathy, right? It's not about feeling sorry for that individual person. It's about being able to truly understand where they're coming from and empathizing with them. It's also about assessing short-term needs. So it doesn't need to be about setting goals that are 6 months, a year down the line. It's about what's going to happen in the next 10 minutes, what's going to happen in the next 10 days, right? It's about listening and understanding first and foremost, right? Especially in circumstances where an individual feels like maybe they haven't been listened to or heard in a long time. Right? It's about assessing danger, but also providing for that person an understanding of their opportunity now moving forward. About addressing safety first and foremost, right, moving forward, and then identifying some of the options they have. So some basic intervention skills that have to do specifically with domestic violence. We want to make sure that we take a moment to create a clear space externally and internally, that we create an environment where we can talk to this person one-on-one, there's not a lot of distraction, and also that we're not distracted, that we're not present in that moment. We want to make sure that we remain calm and centered during this conversation. We're going to hear a person who's probably really desensitized to the trauma they've experienced, to the abuse they've experienced. And so they're gonna speak about these horrific circumstances as if they're commonplace, right? And our ability to regulate our own response to that is important. Regulating our own feelings and the survivor's anger and agitation. This is a person who is probably going to be experiencing a significant range of emotions. Being mindful not to impose personal values or feelings regarding the situation, and especially not to convey disappointment or rejection if this person chooses to go back to their abusive partner. They've experienced enough guilt and shame. It's not our role to place that on them again, right? And then explaining all kinds of information thoroughly, repeating all kinds of information, especially if we're talking about steps afterwards, medical procedures afterwards, things like that. Even encouraging them to write it down or have a friend write it down for them if someone else is present. That all helps them later on, because when we're experiencing trauma, we're going through crisis, we're not remembering everything, right? Everything's coming in bits and pieces for us. If you are responding to a home environment where children are present and domestic violence is also in that home environment, we understand that families under stress produce children under stress. So you're going to experience children, even as maybe secondary victims to this trauma, who are going through very similar reactions, both physically and emotionally. So these are just some of the things that we're going to see in children who have witnessed domestic violence, including things like extreme fear or anxiety responses, especially if a child, you reach to, put your arm around them and they flinch away from that touch, or they, you show your open palm and they flinch from that. Behavioral problems, anger, things like that, especially shame, guilt, and embarrassment themselves. Difficulty trusting, especially adults, right? They haven't been able to trust the adults in their life who they're supposed to be able to trust the most, so it's going to be difficult for them to trust any adult, especially a helping profession. We're going to maybe see parentification, which is older siblings taking on the parent roles for their younger siblings. Low self-esteem and self-worth, depression or flashbacks. They might themselves be experiencing dating relationships that are unhealthy or substance abuse as a coping strategy, and then potentially practicing self-harming behavior as a way to control their environment. We know that children are affected both in their environment and also biologically. So these are the scans of 2 3-year-old boys. Both are identified kind of in the same developmental stage, but both you can see have very different development in their brain functioning. So the child who identifies as normal is growing up in a home with a mother and a father and a healthy, stable home environment. And the child identified with extreme neglect is growing up in a home environment with domestic violence present. So we see, of course, that the difference in size and development is extreme, but we also see that there are dark areas of the brain, and those are parts of the brain that help to process emotion, both in yourselves and other people. So these are children who are this is a child who's going to be maybe quicker to anger or stress responses, a child who is going to have some challenges with peer-to-peer relationships because they're not going to have the same range of emotions as their peers, and therefore not be able to feel understood or understand others. And these are parts of the brain that develop in 0 to 5 years old, and then at 5 years old, wherever they're at, they stop so that the other parts of the brain can develop. So those dark parts of the brain, in essence, are dead, and they don't grow again at 5 years old. So these are children who then grow up to be adults who have similar peer-to-peer challenges, right? Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are factors in childhood that influence a lifespan. They include varying degrees of abuse, neglect, and dysfunction in a household environment. And this is a study that originally came out of public health. So what we've been able to do is make a real connection between domestic violence and long-term health. And this is how that kind of works. So essentially we have an adverse childhood experience. We'll say that's witnessing domestic violence in the home. And because that child witnesses domestic violence, we remember that list of challenges they'll have and also their development and brain functioning. This leads them to social, emotional, and cognitive impairments. So socially, they'll have challenges relating to their peers. Emotionally, they won't be able to understand or experience the full range of emotions. And cognitively, they have lower developmental functioning. Because of these social, emotional, and cognitive impairments, they may adopt health risk behaviors. Things like smoking or alcohol use as a coping strategy or a way to relate to their peers and feel appropriate in social settings. They might adopt health risk behaviors in diet or exercise, in lifestyle choice, things like that. So those adoptions of health risk behaviors lead to additional disease, disability, and social problems. So again, because of their choices, they may go ahead and experience health risks. They may also experience social problems like an inability to keep or maintain a job, challenges in their own adult relationships, things like that. And those diseases, disabilities, and social problems lead to early death. So we've been able to make a direct link between adverse childhood experiences, especially like domestic violence, and early death. So in April of this last year, One Safe Place partnered with Public Health and also with the Women's Fund of the Shasta Regional Community Foundation to bring the No More campaign here to Shasta County. And it's a movement that's happening across the nation. The No More campaign is all about our community response to domestic and sexual violence. And really this came out of, as we were sharing the information within our community and the challenges that our community faces, an understanding that people want to know what they can do about it, right? We're in a profession that helps others, but there are many people out there who still feel that pull to help when they see something unsafe going on. And so really this is our national call to end the destructive attitudes and behaviors that perpetuate violence. The excuses that we make for violent perpetrators, the victim blaming behavior and myth around domestic and sexual violence. So this really helps us to address those concerns. It started out as a campaign by Mariska Hargitay and her husband. She's the star of Law and Order SVU. But since then, we've taken this model and we've used it locally. So you'll see faces of our police chiefs and you'll see faces of local business owners and community leaders who are standing up and taking on this charge. Other things that some folks can do to be a part of the messaging is to share the videos and posters that we've created around this campaign and participate in trainings that help us to better understand our role. Our Unselfie challenge is those photos you see right over here where people are taking a photo of themselves for a very unselfish purpose of bringing awareness for others. We can talk about violence prevention because it's not something that gets talked about very often. And we can also be what we call an active bystander. Now, I'm sort of preaching to the choir here. I know that many of you in your profession are the individuals in a crowd who do step forward and do something when you see unsafe circumstances happening. But we have to work with the rest of the community to understand this as well. And we also have to work on understanding how it relates to us in our personal life. So the bystander effect theory helps us to inform this information, and it states that the greater the number of bystanders witnessing an unsafe circumstance, the less likely it is that any one person is going to step up and help. So essentially this refers to cases where individuals don't offer help in emergency circumstances when other people are present. Now, why in the world is that? Essentially, what we see is a number of excuses or reasonings explaining away why we would not provide help and assistance. So this is what we call a diffusion of responsibility, that we assume in a crowd that someone else has already made that phone call or someone else is going to step forward and do it, or it's not my problem, right? It's not my business. I don't want to get in the middle of it, especially when it relates to family violence or domestic violence. Now, we have a really great example of this that came out about 4 years ago now. It showed up as a YouTube video. The man in the video was identified as Chip Man, and in essence, it provided a great example for us about the simplicity of bystander engagement. Now the video starts, it's a busy New York subway train, and there's people entering and exiting the train, and the guy's taking a video on his cell phone, and as the video starts up, you see a man and a woman enter the train. And the man is following after the woman, and she's carrying a bag, and they're arguing back and forth. You can see they're in a verbal argument, and then as they enter into the train, it becomes physical. They're starting to swing at each other, they're kicking their legs up, they're trying their best to sort of create a scene, right? And in all of this, the doors of the train close, and the train starts moving, and nobody else on the train is doing or saying anything. They're all averting their eyes, they're all giving them space, they're moving away. No one is stepping forward to help. And then you see a man enter the frame, and he is eating a bag of Doritos. And he looks like he's maybe trying to find a place to sit or stand. And he comes and he places himself between that man and that woman. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't do anything. He just keeps eating his chips. And automatically, both that man and that woman, they stop what they're doing, right? And they're kind of shocked. Like, why is this guy standing in the middle of us? Doesn't he see that we're having a conversation here? So they're kind of like offended, taken aback. And it gives enough of a pause for the woman you see here in the poncho to step forward, and she says, sir, ma'am, I feel like this is a really unsafe situation, and I'm concerned for both of you. So, sir, I'm going to have you stand over here, and ma'am, I'm going to have you take my seat. You sit right over here. And when the train stops, sir, I'm going to just have you get off the train, and you can enter onto a different car. You can get off altogether. But this is really unhealthy, and I need you both to understand it's not okay. So she clearly has some, intervention skills. She's got some conflict resolution. Maybe she's got some experience in advocacy or something like that. And so she steps forward and is able to sort of diffuse that situation. And then you hear the guy who's been videotaping everyone with his cell phone. He goes, yeah, buddy, that's right. You do or say anything, I'm going to give this video to the police. So you better just get off the train at the next stop. And the video ends. Now this video made it on YouTube. It went viral. Chipman got invited to Oprah, right? And in all of this, everyone who he was speaking to, who was interviewing him, was like, oh my gosh, how did you do that? That was incredible. And he was like, really? Seriously? I didn't do anything special, right? So what was it about this situation that made Chipman into this hero, into a guy who has a name, who's like known to people, who Oprah invited to her show? Right? He essentially showed other people that it was okay. Right? He was the first person to step forward, and he didn't have to have all the answers, and he didn't have to know exactly what to do. He just had to know that it wasn't safe. Right? And he opened up the doors for other people who were feeling the exact same way to do something about it. Right? So bystander engagement doesn't have to be about one individual taking the charge up. It has to be about us as human beings understanding our role. We've all been a bystander in our lives. Again, many of us in our professional lives are the people who step forward, of course. But in our personal lives, maybe we've witnessed a couple fighting in a parking lot, and we haven't felt that it was our place to go ahead and step forward and say something. Or maybe we've seen a mother interacting with her child inappropriately in the cereal aisle, and we haven't known or understood what to do or say to stop that from happening, right? And so in this process, we're working on creating a community where we make a choice between active and passive, right? Where we step forward and we as a community address these issues. We say it's not okay, and we say no more. And these are just some simple tips that we share with our community, and many of our trainings around bystander engagement involve continuing to practice and engage people in this conversation so that they feel comfortable when they find themselves in that situation where, before maybe they wouldn't have known what to do, and now they have some tools, right? So safety is always the most important thing in these situations. If it's unsafe, we don't want people to step forward and try to intervene because it's going to create even more unsafe circumstances. But if it is safe and the individuals do not feel that law enforcement is necessary, then using I statements often help to diffuse some of that situation, and they also don't allow for the pointing of fingers so that that person might feel defensive. Tension reduction through humor is a tactic that many of us have probably employed in our lifetime. So, to help that person to understand that it's not as serious as they're, thinking it is. This, of course, used sparingly, but in essence, used to help to kind of understand that, oh yeah, I can kind of chuckle at this moment, right? Group intervention, in that circumstance with Chipman, if he had made eye contact with someone else in the room and had been able to kind of address that, maybe the two of them could have walked forward together, right? In a lot of these circumstances, what we have to remember is that we're not the only one feeling this discomfort. So if we can make eye contact with someone else, or we can bring a friend along with us and we can both intervene, that creates in us a bit of comfort, right? In knowing that we're not alone in that theory, in that thought. Bring it home. So this can be, I hope no one ever talks about you that way, or I hope no one ever treats someone that you love in that way, right? So really helping that person to understand what that feels like. Reframing as a non-critical friend, especially if you have a previous relationship with this person, hey, we're friends, right? So I can tell you that your behavior makes me feel really uncomfortable, and I'd like to work with you on how to improve that moving forward, right? And then distraction, which is one of my favorite tactics because it really does eliminate any of your discomfort or feelings of embarrassment, right? Chipman was a perfect example of that. He stepped forward, he kind of, acted silly or acted like he didn't know what was going on, he kept eating his chips, right? But he created enough of a distraction for other people to step forward. We all have that red button on our key fob that we push on accident all the time, and then we have to scramble to try to find it again. If you are in your home and you see something going on outside that's unsafe, or if you're in a parking lot, pushing that red button often distracts a person enough. At least we look most of the time, right? So that might be enough of a distraction. I have a friend of mine who works in this same field who took a group of our shelter clients to a Kings game, a Sacramento Kings game a few years back, and they were all sitting in a row, and she was really excited. None of them had ever been to a professional sporting event before, so they were all so excited about it. And as they were sitting there waiting for the game to start, a man and a woman, a couple came and sat in front of them, and they started arguing. And this woman, a service provider, all of us, she's like, my individuals I'm here with, they might trigger, they might feel really uncomfortable, I don't really know what to do in this situation. So she had a soda, and she stood up like she was going to try to, shuffle to the restroom maybe, and she accidentally spilled it over the top of them, right? And of course, when you have soda and ice spilled down your back, you're going to stop whatever you're doing, right? You're going to kind of pause for a moment. And she was able to, again, act kind of like Chipman, kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm such a klutz. I can't believe I did that. I'm so sorry. Here, let me go grab you some napkins, right? And so she ran up and she grabbed him some napkins. And on the way back, she stopped a security officer and she said, hey, I've got this situation that's really unsafe. Can you come by in about 5 minutes? And so she went back down, she gave him the napkins. I'm so sorry again. Oh, I'm such a klutz. I'm so sorry. I'm going to sit back down in my seat now. And then that officer was able to come forward and help. No skin off her nose. No, putting herself out there. No creating an unsafe circumstance for anyone else she was with. But doing something. Doing anything that helps that circumstance, right? I want to just share one more tip with all of you that we use often in this process that really helps a person to start to plan, especially if, as we talked about, not everyone is going to want to leave that relationship right away or going to have the means to leave that relationship right away. So safety planning is a great way to help the survivor to understand the importance of safety for themselves and their children. And it really can be something that's flexible and individualized for that person. In essence, it can be used in dealing in an emergency, in continuing to live with or date an abusive partner if that's the choice they're making, and also in protecting themselves and their children if they're choosing to end the relationship. And as we said, that's one of the most dangerous times when they've said they're going to leave or they've actually left, right? That control that other person has lessened, and so now there's a concern that they're losing control. They need to employ whatever they can. In assessing safety in these circumstances, we need to understand if either the woman or children is in immediate danger. Has the violence escalated more recently? Is there any threat of weapons or things like that are being employed? Are there weapons in the home environment at all? And then if the person is not safe, do they have a safety plan? Do they have a plan for what they're going to do in case? And safety plans are all about what-if statements. So if something happens, then I'm going to do this, this, and this, right? I'm going to go to this place. I'm going to reach out to this person. I'm going to find this resource, right? So the plan should consider a variety of circumstances. So again, if the person comes home unexpectedly, if we get into an argument during the day, if we get into an argument during the night, so kind of running through all circumstances. It should be concrete and practical considerations, right? And it should also contain local resource numbers that I can get to really quickly. So it's going to contain 911, of course, and other, emergency needs, but it's also maybe going to include a local hotline number, a local domestic violence shelter like One Safe Place or others in your area. So safety plans are going to include things like packing a bag in advance, maybe leaving it at a friend or family member's house, or leaving it in a safe place where they could exit quickly. Having personal documents ready, so having things like birth certificates and marriage licenses and things that you may need, bank statements and things like that moving forward. Hiding extra set of keys for the house and the car so that you can get out quickly, again, if those things are kept from you or those things are taken from you in some way. Establishing a code with family and friends. Maybe it's a word that you say, you call and you just have to say that word and they know what's going on. Or maybe it's an understanding that, if they don't hear from you by a certain time, they know that you're in your safe place and they know where that place is. And then it's having a plan of where to go, whether that's coming to seek a local resource, going to law enforcement, or it's going to a friend or family member or something like that. Okay, any questions? Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. That's a huge factor, right? For many people, our animals are our children, especially if we don't have children ourselves. So I know my dog is my everything, right? So I wouldn't necessarily feel like I could leave that dog behind if I needed to get out quickly. Locally, we work with Haven Humane, and so they offer up shelter stays that are free of charge for the animal for as long as they're staying in our shelter, and then that individual can go and see that animal as often as they need to. And many other communities have similar relationships with local rescue shelters or rescue organizations to be able to provide that need, because we know that's a really big factor in someone choosing to leave or stay. Absolutely, great question. Any others? Okay. All right, I believe it's time for your review. I just wanted to throw up really quickly our One Safe Place information. So our website is ospshasta.org. That hotline number is 244-0117. It's 24/7, 365 days a year. And our shelter is open for those same resources. And then that downtown Market Street location and our hours of operation as well. All right, are we ready for the review? Okay. Let's see. So the majority of domestic violence victims are women between the ages of 25 to 35. True or false? Good job. I'm impressed. Okay, number 2, domestic violence always occurs in lower income homes. False, absolutely. I'm glad you all said that. I didn't really touch on it too much, but we know that domestic violence doesn't discriminate. So we're going to see it in all socioeconomic levels. We're going to see it across our community. This is stuff that happens behind closed doors, in home environments, and so even in the best homes, there's the potential for this to occur. Number 3, 3 women and 1 man are killed each day in the U.S. by their intimate partner. That is true. Unfortunately, that is true. And then according to the cycle of violence, what happens to the honeymoon phase over time in an unhealthy relationship? A, it gets bigger and better. B, it gets smaller and shorter. C, it may disappear completely, or both B and C. All right, we'll check back on that one. And then number 5, statistically, women in abusive relationships are most at risk, A, during the time they are leaving or have recently left the relationship, B, during the first 6 months of the relationship, C, during the holiday season, or D, during the summer months. Okay. So here are those answers one more time. Number 1 is false. Number 2 is also false. Number 3 is true. Number 4 is D, both B and C is correct there. And then number 5, it was A, during the time they are leaving or have recently left the relationship. Okay. That's it. Thank you.
No more questions for Emily? Oh, okay, go ahead. The question is this Shasta County only, or can other counties reach you too?
So One Safe Place generally offers services in Shasta County because that's where our offices are located, but we will take and help anyone who is in need. So we have helped individuals across the country to relocate here or to provide services in their particular area. If you call that hotline number 24/7, we will get you the help you need. Absolutely.
Any others? Bueller. Oh, over here. Do you have brochures?
They are in the back. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
And I believe, are they in the in your bags? I think there's a brochure in the bag. Excellent. All right. Other questions for Emily? Thank you so much once again.